I will try. Thank you, Silja, for the friendly introduction. Professor Henriksen, Dr. Haga, thank you very much for inviting me to the Royal Norwegian Air Force Academy Air Power Conference. Madam, Sir, Commandant, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll try to talk about China. Now I just press button. Oh. This is what we can try to do. Images and perceptions, Xi Jinping and the Chinese dream, China's interests in politics, the South China Sea, certainly, Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road Initiative, and finally, what to do, possibly. Let's start with a few pictures and images after the coffee break. What is a Chinese dream and why is a Chinese dream crucial and dangerous at the same time? What comes after a dream? A nightmare? What if the Chinese dream crashes? There are many dangerous and challenges combined to the Chinese dream. And why did Xi Jinping, China's chairman of the Communist Party, chairman of the Central Military Commission, and third and last and less important position inside China's power political system, President of the People's Republic of China, why did he come up with that huge slogan? Couldn't he have done with something a bit smaller? That's quite a challenge, especially since he personalized the Chinese dream and the fulfillment of the Chinese dream with him personally. It's linked to him. That means no failure whatsoever. The Chinese dream is quite an astonishing political slogan in the history of communist leaders of China. It used to be quite some boring stuff like harmonious society or a scientific development or the three representatives of the people. Nobody really understood what it was. But he came up with a dream. And that's a signal, that's a symbol of China's new pride and self-consciousness. That's the symbol of China's new, we are big and beautiful again, finally. We are seeing, of course, all the armed forces here, China's aircraft carrier, the Chinese wall, China's space program, and possibly missiles and possibly future space stations. Here, China, of course, stands for peace. That's very important. The Chinese Air Force here, and no, that's not the South China Sea. These are islands belonging to the Senkaku or Diaoyutai island chain, which goes down from Ryukyu or Okinawa chain down towards Taiwan, which is another unsolved dispute between China and his or her neighbors. What is important to watch here, it's like the sun. It's like Jesus standing before the sun with glory, and only Mao pestered Chinese public space with posters like that, identifying himself with sort of a higher figure, a godlike figure, referring to Chinese past, celestial and ceremonial past here. What else did Xi Jinping come up with? Fighting tigers and flies. That's his big anti-corruption campaign. Tigers are the big generals, the big officers, the big company CEOs, and the flies are all the little ones who are corrupt and who accept money here. Fighting tigers and flies resulted in Xi Jinping creating hundreds, thousands of enemies for himself. He imprisoned hundreds of generals, thousands of officers, tens of thousands of civil servants, clerks, company officials, party officials through the whole country. And these people wish him dead or in prison. The Fighting Tigers and Flies is one of the huge campaigns, one of the biggest campaigns after Mao, and is dangerous for stability inside the Chinese society. Everybody is afraid now to even move, and foreign company officials complain that nothing moves in China anymore because everybody is afraid to make the wrong step and getting accused of being corrupt. Plus, some of these corruption trials are outside the Chinese official legal system, because every party official and every officer is drawn in front of a party discipline company or a military discipline company, which will not only end his or her civilian life, but his or her party and military life too. There are other big party slogans made in China 2025. By 2025, China wants to be the leading technological country in the world. And 2049 is another crucial day and date in the Chinese contemporary history. They think in decades and centuries, not like us. 2049 is more or less day after tomorrow, because this will be the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. The empire broke down in 1911, then the Republic of China was erected, which now exists on the island of Taiwan. That is, as a political system, much older, the Republic of China, than the People's Republic. So we have two not really competing political systems here, but a different and difficult history. And then, of course, there's the famous 19th Party Congress, where Xi Jinping not only turned the Politburo upside down, but large parts of the military. The military officials now sitting in the 19th Party Congress are all new. That means he has his own followers in the military. He has a large backup in the military. He chucked out all the old generals on accusations of corruption and has more or less created his own followership, not only inside the party, but also in the military. That's very clever. That's a strategic move. In 2018, now the National People's Congress, China's parliament, lifted that until then existing 2 terms presidential term limit. That means Xi could be or could stay in power forever. Why did he do that? A couple of reasons. The first one we know already, the corruption program. All these people who want to see him dead or in prison, of course, will not wait, so he has to stay in power as long as possible for not getting drawn and dragged in front of a court. Second reason is he really thinks in terms of duty and responsibility. And the third reason, as I think, is he needs more time. China has so many challenges ahead of it. The economic reconstruction, all these domestic challenges, and of course, the Chinese dream to make China big and beautiful and powerful again. So he needs more time. More pictures. This is not only China's first VIP couple and China's superstar couple. This is also China's first lady and first superstar first lady. The Chinese dream, the dream of a strong nation. Again, Tiananmen Gate. Peng Liyuan, the wife of Xi Jinping, is a former Major General of the People's Liberation Army Entertainment Battalion or Division. She's an excellent singer, an opera singer. She's really Anna Netrebko of China, with the difference that about 800 million people or 1,000 million people know her, and not only 80 million people. She is a beautiful woman. She's a superstar. Everybody knows her in China, whatever she does and wears. Of course, it's being recorded in the yellow press, and people love her. She is a symbol of the new, beautiful and powerful China that is not ashamed anymore, but proud to show itself to the whole world. The summit, or the peak of this new development, the new China, was not a visit in the White House. White House is fine, power-wise. But for political symbolism, what is much more important is the Queen. For one reason, one of the predecessors of the Queen had not only been a queen of England, but the Empress of India. And that is important at times when the court in China, the Chinese Empire, was on its way down already, not only due to British opium imports, but also due to own inability and corruption. One has to say that very clearly. When this picture went through the Chinese press, the Queen here in full state gown with crown and orders and whatnot, Prince Philip, Peng Liyuan here in a rather modest Chinese design dress, and Xi Jinping, funnily, not in a tuxedo, but what seems to be his idea of a Chinese formal suit. When that went through the Chinese press, everybody in China said, now we made it. This is important. It's important to make the people happy in China. The times when the Communist Party can dictate everything, they are over. The people have to be happy and they have to stay happy. This is one way to make them happy. Okay, that's it with the nice pictures. Here come more problematic pictures. Xi Jinping belongs to the lost generation. He is the generation that suffered, that had been victims, but also these actionists in the great proletarian cultural revolution with a violent phase from 66 to 69, and that only ended up with in 76 with the death of Mao. What had happened? Mao tried to get rid of his competitors and his critiques in launching a huge campaign that smashed everything. All values, old writings, old salient, old tradition, everything had been smashed. And the youth of the country went to the streets, public life disappeared, China disappeared in a stage of civil war for many, many years. Schools were closed, universities were closed, and the young people were finally sent to the countryside to do very, very basic, uneducated field work. For many years. Xi Jinping had been sent to the countryside for 7 or 8 years between the age of 15 and 25. That means no formal education, all universities and schools closed. And this generation, when they were young at that time, they are now the leaders of China. And this experience of a lost generation, of a lost decade, is shaping, or had been shaping, his inner path and his career path. He understood exactly. I have to fight hard, I have to study hard, I have to work hard, and I always have to be at the top of the rank in order for that to not happen again. This is very insulting. People's officials, all of you, would have been dragged outside and forced to self-criticism, standing there like that for hours. Many people committed suicide because they were so ashamed of themselves. This is important to understand when we think about the political considerations of China's political leaders. They all experienced the Cultural Revolution, and they will make sure that Tiananmen, which has its 30th anniversary to this year in June, Tiananmen Square massacre, as we call it, or Tiananmen incident, as it's called in China, where the students put to the streets and protested against the government. They will make sure that this will not happen again, whatever it takes. China's political power structure. This is an ideal picture, and it's completely wrong, but it's the best we can get. The party is above everything else. Of course, there's a state structure as we know it, with a government, with ministries, a cabinet, a parliament, all down to the local level. But on top of everything is the Chinese Communist Party. It's written in the Chinese Constitution. The preamble of the Chinese Constitution says, country, people, society is under the guidance of the Chinese Communist Party. China is a socialist state under the democratic dictatorship of the people. This is what the Constitution says. It doesn't say anything about human rights or mankind or whatever. Xi Jinping did something else which is crucial. He limited the standing Politburo down to 7, including himself. Why? It's much easier to scare 6 other people than to scare 17 other people, right? A very clever move. Still, we need to watch China very closely. We need to talk to China, and we have to take serious their own security concerns and their threat perceptions. China is facing an economic slowdown, an economic restructuring. China is experiencing slower growth. You might remember these fantastic growth rates of 12%, of 9%. That's all gone. They can be happy when they still have 6%. Still, the world won't suffer and China won't be going down for a couple of reasons. China is simply reaching a new level of development. What do our economies have? 2, 3, maximum 4%, rather 1.6 or 1.2. So this is also regarded by economic observers as a healthy development. But China will lose its advantage, its competitive advantage, when the wages rise, of course. Then production in China will be more expensive, which is good for the Chinese workers and Chinese clerks, of course. Environmental destruction is one of the worst challenges in China. We can't talk about pollution 2/3 of waters in China are contaminated. They can't be used for anything. You can't even touch that. It's too dangerous to put a finger inside because it's pure poison. The Chinese government admits that it won't be possible, with all the money in the world, to sort of turn that development around. The Chinese environment, Chinese waters are not only polluted, they're contaminated. And then there is the social balance at bay, of course. Some rich people in China are earning more and more, and then there are these poor people who don't get proper jobs. Unemployment suddenly, with a slower growth rate and the slowdown of the economy, is a problem in China now. People don't find work here. And then China needs to fix its tax system. Many Chinese don't pay tax. The official income is below a certain level. That's quite fair and quite nice. It seems to be, at first glance, a clever government move, but it's not, because it keeps some income away from the state and the government. So most contracts are just below the level, and then people get some surplus payings, and this is why they don't pay tax. They're supposed to hand in a tax declaration, I think, from this year on, but authoritarian regimes usually don't press the people and the society to hand in their tax declaration for obvious reasons. Because if you pay tax, you want to know what your leadership does with the money, and at the end, you will want to have a say in how that money is spent. If you really need a third and fourth and fifth aircraft carrier and a new strategic submarine fleet, because the social system has to be fixed, the education system has to be fixed, there is not enough pensions for the old people, China is an aging society, it will get old before it gets rich, all these domestic challenges. And someday the people of China will want to have a say in how all that money is spent and who spends it. And then China is claiming it's a victim of terrorism. Until 2014, international observers said, yes, sure, you have a terrorism problem. With all that, you're very, very strong and very fierce domestic security forces. But they changed, because a new quality of terrorism is now in China in action, and that is suicide attack, which China hardly experienced before. So the number, the quantity and the quality of terrorism attacks is going up. Many attacks are being conducted by ITIM, East Turkestan Independent Movement, and most of them unfortunately come from the Uyghur population in the northwest of China. Most of the Uyghurs are being suppressed and oppressed in a very brutal way. Most of them keep away from ITIM and don't have anything to do with ITIM. It's of no use. Chinese security forces will march in a mosque on Friday afternoon or Friday minor and drag everybody out and force people to cut their beards and things like that. China also suffers from the three evils: terrorism, extremism, separatism, and increasingly drugs. Because from Afghanistan and Pakistan, not only Islamistic extremism, fighters, warriors, weapons, but drugs are coming into China now. Which brings us to the next picture, threat perceptions. What is China being afraid of? China's threat perception, regional security. China has two neighbors nobody wants. One is North Korea, and the other one is Afghanistan. China has a couple of other neighbors that are a bit difficult due to own faults and own homemade failures in foreign policy. One is Japan. Japan, the dispute about the Senkaku or Ryukyu Islands here. Then the, I quote, unresolved Taiwan issue. The South China Sea, of course. Islamistic, separatistic, extremistic movements here in Southeast Asia. The strategic bottleneck of the Malacca Strait, 2/3 of Persian Gulf oil flow or sail through the Malacca Strait to the extremely oil import-dependent economies of Southeast Asia, and these are China, Japan, and South Korea. Japan has to import 95% of its oil. India, the competitor or old rival. There are disputes and small battles between India and China here in the Himalaya region. The Uyghurs in Xinjiang in the northwest. The not very stable stance in Central Asia, here Afghanistan, and all that insecurity, instability that comes in further from the Middle East now. And that, from the view of China, from the perception of China, is combined with another threat to be squeezed in between American allies from this side and from this side, meaning the American Pacific Defense Alliance with Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and now with the new Indo-Pacific idea with India, possibly. That is threatening China's national interests from the East, and American allies and friends, partnership for peace also here in Central Asia, is threatening or deterring China's interests from the West. Let's look at a few conflicts here. The South China Sea. The issue is that China claims the whole South China Sea. The Philippines, Sultanate Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam more or less put that 200 nautical miles zone, economic exclusive influence zone, from their coastal waters here. And all these conflicts escalate in the south, where geologists consider major oil and gas reserves to be located here. Many structures in the South China Sea are reefs, sandbanks, mostly underwater, very shallow, difficult to navigate, and difficult to possess, of course. UNCLOS. China is a party of United Nations Convention on the Sea, Law of the Sea, says you all know that, the 12 nautical mile zone, and then the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone can be executed sovereign rights, including fishing and, of course, all the oil and gas under subsoil, if, that's important, Article 121, if on these rocks and sandbanks and whatever, economic life and human habitation is possible. That means a rock and a sandbank and a reef, which is not an island, does not match into this ruling here, which says that most of the structures, of course, China's, from a legal point of view, China's acquisitions here are completely illegal. We also have the ecological side, that all that island construction, island building in the South China Sea destroys tropical island paradises here in a catastrophic way. What is China doing with all these sand digging ships? They dig first a deep sea port in order for large ships to sail in and safely harbor and secure it there. And with all that sand and concrete and more concrete, they do here airstrips. This is the power structure in the South China Sea, a Chinese Coast Guard and a tiny, tiny Philippine support ship, which was sort of pushed away for days, and that means the Philippine soldiers didn't get any food rations. They had to collect rainwater and try and catch fish, and that was it. I think they were relieved. China, for the Philippines, gave up that particular reef, let's put it that way. It's not only China that is building islands. Everybody else does it too, but China is doing that on the large scale. Up to now, or officially, these are not troops and armed forces. There might be some engineer battalions, or Coast Guard, or customs, or whatever, including what observers call China's maritime militia. Maritime People's War is to be conducted in the South China Sea. That's very clever. No official troops, but all these, let's say, underworked fishermen, all of them with military training, of course, and guns in their ships, are more than happy, due out of true patriotism and honest nationalism, to protect Chinese rights in the South China Sea. That means China doesn't even need to send official troops and warships there. They have about 20 million fishermen somewhere on the South Chinese coast that are only happy to get some money and a mission. That's one of the worst examples here. It's Fury Cross, which used to be only a tiny listening station, and the rest of that structure was underwater, below the water, most of the year, of course. Now it looks like that. An airstrip of 10,000 feet that is now being expanded to large bombers too, had been set up in 2016 already. And we have reports and overflow images that there are missile stations here too. The Philippines took one part of the South China Sea in their 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone in front of the International Court in The Hague, which ruled that China had violated the Philippine sovereign rights in its exclusive economic zone. China causes harm to coral reefs, environment, violated its obligations, and so on, so on. The dispute involved military activities. China's large-scale land reclamation is incompatible with the obligations of state during dispute, and so on, so on. China didn't even send a delegate to The Hague and said the court is not in charge of the whole thing. That was China's answer. That's tough. On the issues concerning China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights, some offshore neighbors are taking provocative action and reinforce their military presence on China's reefs and islands. Huh? It's not China's reefs and islands, but in Chinese eyes, it's China's reefs and islands. And they have illegally occupied. External countries, that's always the United States, of course, are busy meddling in South China Sea affairs, and they maintain close air and sea surveillance and reconnaissance against China. Long-standing task for China to safeguard maritime rights and interests. We are only protecting our maritime interests and rights. Yes. That is very strong. You know that beautiful cartoon from The Economist here. Chinese territory, get off, this is international waters, get off my back. This is reality now in the South China Sea. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that the people of China, most of them, are quite happy with that. And even Chinese colleagues, friends, students, intellectuals, academics would tell you, I have a map like that in my room since childhood, with that 9-dash line, that famous red line, and it never occurred to me that this could not be Chinese, that this is not China's territorial waters. Of course it is. Of course it's ours. Now try and argue against that. It's not the Chinese politicians and the Chinese military who say the South China Sea is China. It's the people, most of them, who say, of course it's ours, for 800 years now, at least. It's very important to not only look at the politics and political leadership, but also at society here. China's 2015 white paper, just as an example of the new military self-consciousness and self-pride China is putting on display here, is that was very strange, because why are they coming up in 2016? They issued in 2015 and published the next year, so it's 2016 white paper. Why a quote by Mao Zedong? If we are attacked, we will certainly counterattack. For the first time, and that is crucial, Chinese government white papers tell us a lot about Chinese planning and Chinese politics here. Stability used to be the most important thing, the highest priority in everything in China. Stability, economic stability, stability in the neighborhood, whatever. No, that's gone. The highest priority now is defending China's growing interests. That is dangerous, because that's the opposite of a cooperative policy with neighbors or including neighbors. Threats are American hegemonism and neo-intervention, terrorism, separatism, and extremism. A strong military is part of the Chinese dream. That means the military in China can expect a lot of money in the next years, and they already received a lot of money. The armed forces are supposed to improve combat readiness. Maritime power has to defend China's rights and interests, Chinese reefs. The Navy is to dominate territorial waters. Now, what is that? That is, of course, everything around China, including the Taiwan Strait, and, of course, the South China Sea, down to Singapore almost, and so on, so on. The Air Force is supposed to conduct not only defensive but offensive operations, trans-theater mobility, a missile program, space, cyberspace, and electronic warfare is pretty openly described. China does not try to hide that it's investing two-digit billion per year into electronic warfare research and development. That's quite open. You can read it. It's in English. They're not trying to hide that here, of course. And something we find strange because of all these priorities here, but that's typical Chinese socialist rhetorics here, ideological and political building, holding up socialist values. The military, the People's Liberation Army, is under the absolute control of the Communist Party and the Central Military Commission. That means not the People's Congress, not the people. It's not the People's Army, it's the party's army, due to history, of course, too. Now, a few notes on the Silk Road Initiative, the Belt and Road Program here. It includes roads, rails, pipelines, ports, everything. It includes that sort of the horizontal dimension. It includes oil and gas, and it includes space. The Silk Road program is in reality a three-dimensional approach to the next century here. The belt in the former BRI, the belt are the land routes here, all these economic corridors and all these roads, and the roads are the sea roads, the sea routes, sea lines of communication around the whole world. It's not only connecting East Asia to Europe here, it's about connecting China to the rest of the world, and of course trying to sell Chinese goods to other markets here. Now, we always have to take into account what is interesting for Norway here, and that might be that route around here, that new maritime road around here. If that becomes open and safe the whole year through, you have to expect a lot more traffic. And what does more traffic mean? More pollution and more accidents. And all these has to be watched by the Air Force. Let's look at a few other examples. The port of Piraeus here. The press went, while China is sort of buying up Greece. No, that's not true. COSCO, Chinese big company, has a 51% lease for 40 years in the port of Piraeus and the majority of one of the managing companies. Yes, that is true. But that money helped to develop Greece, of course. On the other hand, why did Greece sell a 51% stake in its port to a Chinese company for only a couple of $100 million if the EU is putting billions of euro into Greece? So Europe has still room to maneuver and room for improvement in her politics towards the smaller eastern and southern neighbors. We need to listen more carefully to the smaller, newer EU members, and we need to listen very carefully to the smaller, weaker and poorer eastern and southern European countries, especially Germany. Let's look at, I'm only going to say two sentences, but, okay, now. And if Germany's China policies consists mainly of how can we sell more BMWs and Mercedes and Audis to China, that lacks comprehensiveness. And then we won't ever have a strategic European, Asia or China policy if Germany's main interest and objective is to sell more cars. That's not smart, that's not future-minded. Okay, but that's it. I won't say anything more about China. About Germany. Now, does Montenegro really need that am I supposed to stop? Okay. Yes, I will. Okay. Does Montenegro really need that highway to Serbia? Maybe not. Does Sri Lanka really need a port here in Hambantota, which is empty? 300 ships per, now listen closely, 300 ships per year movements. That is an empty port. That is nothing, right? This is not only mismanagement, this is misinvestment, and it always, all these Belt and Road and Silk Road projects, all the power stations, the roads, the ports, the dams, everything comes with a price tag. A heavy price tag, and it usually comes with a Chinese loan, high Chinese interest rates with Chinese banks, and it has to be paid back by the host country, which is usually a weak and poor country on the fringes of somewhere, in that case here, South Asia and Europe. Sri Lanka gave that back to China for 99 years, but what does China want with an empty port? That's bad business, right? Same here in Myanmar, same in Malaysia. Huge projects, far too big, of incredible scale and incredible costs. And now many countries, not only Sri Lanka, but Myanmar and Malaysia, for example, are trying to cut back, at least cut back these gigantic investment sums here. Don't even look at the numbers. That's fantastic. This is vision. This is far too much. China has created its own institutions. That is smart. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Silk Road Fund, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Program. The projects include infrastructure, energy, resource trade, and communications. It's on 3 levels. On a national level, of course, China wants to develop the underdeveloped Northwest. That's poor China up there. Get rid of overcapacities in steel and workers. Develop Central Asia. And, of course, get access to the Indian Ocean via Myanmar and via Pakistan here. That's important for China, to have a direct access and be able to circumnavigate, have an alternative route to the Indian Ocean and all this oil in the Middle East without having to sail either through the Malacca Strait or around Indonesia here. Oopsa. And on a global level, of course, enlarge own influence, secure resources, investments, counter US presence, and set up own standards in international, IT, artificial intelligence and space. The problem is, who controls all that? It seems to be only Chinese companies, contractors and banks who make the money here, and the debt trap. For weak host countries, it's a risk, but also for unstable Chinese companies. If they pull together material and workers and a lot of money, and then suddenly this dam or power station in Pakistan is not being constructed, this Chinese company will get into deep trouble, of course, and go bankrupt. So it's not only the poor host countries here. Projects are oversized, and environmental and local concerns are left out. Is that a danger to Chinese dream? I think so. But don't be too surprised by all these new Silk Road visions. There used to be observations before with China's string of pearls strategy, setting up support ports or stations or bases all in Southeast Asia and here along Myanmar, Bangladesh, and in Pakistan, the Gwadar port, of course. This is a problem and a challenge to India's presence, of course, and India's interests in the whole region here. Now, from that structure of our enemy's enemies, our friend, we will have a perfect new ally in India, because China's plans threaten India's interests here. What is even more worrying for Europe is China's 16+1 group, including new EU members and all the poor Eastern and Southern European members. And China put a lot of money into all these Eastern and Southern European countries here. The problem is, due to the euro crisis, the financial crisis, in Eastern Europe we have an investment infrastructure and a gap in infrastructure investment alone of over 300 billion euro. The world needs a lot of investment in infrastructure, not just Eastern Europe, they in particular, of course. But there it's more than $300 billion. And Brexit, of course, means that there will be even less money left over for them here. That's dangerous, and that has the potential to separate Europe and undermine EU regulations here. I'm going to swap over that. That's pretty important. China came up with a policy paper on the European Union. Very interesting. And I'm just reading the most important sentence I find here. The EU should explicitly oppose Taiwan independence in any form and only limit it to non-official and people-to-people activities. That is a problem. Taiwan is not an entity, a sovereign entity of its own. But still, what to do, and then I'm done. Okay. Norway. Now again, with that new routes, that new sea lines of communication, that new transport routes along the Arctic, you will face an incredible problem and challenge in the next decades here, of course. What could be China's interests in Norway? Honestly, not much, but two things: the Arctic and oil. That's crucial to China, both. So I'm telling you, watch your back. But you have a mutual experience. You both have a long coastline, and you both have a difficult neighbor, meaning Russia or the former Soviet Union. So there is sort of a joint experience with a neighbor. Maybe I very carefully draw your attention to a possible three-track approach. There's not NATO makes sure, of course. But bilateral relations, it's important to understand China without giving in on core values, democracy, freedom, and liberalism. Don't ever have anybody discuss with Sweden and Norway the Nobel Prize Committee. And if any ambassador from China comes to the Swedish and Norwegian government to discuss that, have him, whatever, come in and talk to the foreign ministry. That's important. You have to be very, very hard and tough on that. But there could be military-to-military relations, people-to-people relations, etc. And of course, there are the Beijing Winter Olympic Games in 2022. That's more or less day after tomorrow. And there are at least 5 groups of Chinese athletes training in Norway, because your great country is so good in skiing, cross-country, downhill, biathlon, ski jump, and all these things. And China, that's very important for China, winter sports, and at least getting 1 medal in the Winter Games. China is everything but a winter sport nation, right? But they will try everything, and they will be very thankful if you come up and help them and support these achievements here. Maybe could also be a good idea to have officer groups coming over and doing winter sport events together, or have your cadets doing winter sport together. They will be very, very, very happy and thankful for these opportunities. It can't cost that much money here. For Europe, it's not business only. Again, German car industry. What am I supposed to say? There won't be an Asia strategy unless Germany gives up on selling mainly cars, more and more cars to China. A solution for Greece and Hungary to not undermine European resolutions against the human rights situation in China would be a qualified majority. And then just put it in the protocol. Hungary and Greece stepped out. They're not going to sign that. Europe should have a strong position concerning their traditional values and norms. The US could come up with what I call Pivot to Asia 2.0. Hillary Clinton's and Obama's Pivot to Asia had been a good approach. It is a very comprehensive approach. And the most important thing, though, is to pamper the democratic allies in Asia by Europe as a whole, by every single European nation, and by the US. America's alliance system in the Pacific had been built up in a very sophisticated way with high diplomacy and a successful long-term foreign policy strategy. And that's all been ruined and trampled down by the Trump White House. Sorry for saying that so bluntly. You have to pamper your allies. That's very important, because then otherwise they won't defend you if really crisis comes to shore. So stepping up relations to Japan and South Korea, the Republic of Korea, is crucial and can be done by everyone. And that's it. Thank you very much. Will I put that down?